Kalivet Rash stood frozen before the towering crystalline doors of the Vashirian royal palace, clutching the leather-bound book to his chest as if it might shield him from the absurdity of his mission. 3 solar cycles of diplomatic service to the Terran Alliance, and his superiors had sent him to certain death with nothing but paper and ink. "Present your identification and state your purpose," demanded the guard, a 9-foot Vashirian warrior whose iridescent exoskeleton gleamed with deadly efficiency under the triple suns. Kalivet Rash, Terran Alliance cultural envoy. His voice didn't waver, a small miracle. "I bring a diplomatic offering for her luminescence, Empress Nirizal." The guard's compound eyes flickered with unmistakable amusement. Humans had been trying to establish meaningful relations with the Vashirian Empire for decades, each attempt ending in either polite dismissal or, occasionally, violent rejection. The Vashirians, with their technological supremacy and vast interstellar territories, saw little need for human alliances. "The Empress does not accept offerings from lesser species," the guard stated flatly. Kalivet had expected this. "This isn't a traditional gift. It's a book, written by hand, one of a kind." This wasn't entirely accurate. The book was a carefully crafted reproduction of an ancient Earth text, the Odyssey, with lavish hand-drawn illustrations. What made it unique was the binding. Genuine leather, a material so rare in the age of synthetic everything that most humans had never seen it. Something in the guard's posture shifted. Physical objects were uncommon gifts in an era where most species exchanged data or energy constructs. The Vashirians, for all their advancement, held a peculiar reverence for tangible artifacts. Against all protocol and prediction, Kalivet found himself escorted through labyrinthine corridors of living crystal. Each passageway seemed to pulse with bioluminescent light, responding to the movements of those within. Other Vashirians, scientists, advisors, and warriors alike, stopped to stare at the human in their midst. The throne room defied physics. Suspended platforms of transparent crystal floated at various heights, connected by bridges that materialized and dissolved as needed. At the center of it all sat Empress Nirizal on a throne that appeared to be made of frozen starlight. Unlike her subjects, whose exoskeletons ran toward blues and greens, the Empress's carapace shimmered with a deep violet that bordered on black. 6 elegant limbs were arranged in perfect symmetry, and her head crest, the mark of Vashirian royalty, extended 2 feet above her already impressive height. "Your luminescence," the guard announced. "The human brings an anomalous object." "Approach," came her voice, simultaneously melodic and razor-edged. Kalivet ascended a suddenly manifesting crystal staircase, his legs threatening to betray him with each step. Court protocol dictated that he keep his eyes lowered, but he couldn't resist glancing up at the alien monarch who held the fate of countless worlds in her delicate, chitinous hands. Her compound eyes, hundreds of facets reflecting his own image back at him, studied him with clinical detachment. "Explain this offering," she commanded. "A book, your luminescence. A human story about a great journey written in ink on paper and bound by hand." He extended the book. 2 of her secondary limbs reached forward, taking it with surprising gentleness. As her fingers traced the embossed cover, Kalivet noticed something unprecedented occurring in the throne room. Absolute silence. The Empress opened the book, the sound of turning pages audible throughout the vast chamber. When she looked up again, Kalivet felt a cold current run through his blood. "What is this magic human?" she asked, her multifaceted eyes now fixed on him with an intensity that made breathing difficult. "These are not mere symbols. These marks contain worlds." And in that moment, Kalivet realized he hadn't just delivered a diplomatic gift. He had delivered himself into the orbit of the most dangerous being in the known galaxy. 3 days had passed since Kalivet presented the book. 3 days of being neither prisoner nor guest in the crystalline palace that seemed to reshape itself with the Empress's moods. 3 days of waiting, wondering if he'd be executed or simply forgotten. When the summons finally came, Kalivet was escorted not to the throne room but to a chamber he hadn't seen before. Unlike the public areas of the palace with their imposing, geometric precision, This space was almost organic in design, with curved walls that emitted a soft amber glow. The Empress reclined on a nest-like structure, multiple limbs cradling the book he had brought. She didn't look up when he entered. "Your luminescence," Calivet bowed deeply, as protocol demanded. "This Odysseus," she said without preamble, her voice carrying strange harmonic undertones in the intimate setting. "He refused immortality with the nymph to return to his mortal mate." "Yes, you're irrational," she interrupted, "yet compelling." Her head tilted at an angle that would have been impossible for human anatomy. "Explain." Calivet hesitated. How could he explain human longing to a being whose species lived for centuries, whose emotional architecture was fundamentally different from his own? "Love," he said simply, then immediately regretted the inadequacy of his answer. "Love," she repeated, the word taking on an almost musical quality in her mouth. "Your species uses this concept to justify many irrational behaviors. Perhaps rationality isn't always the highest virtue," Calivet ventured, immediately tensing for retribution at his boldness. Instead, the Empress made a sound. A trilling vibration that he realized with shock was Vashirian laughter. "Bold words from a species that barely controls its own planet, let alone the 16 systems my empire encompasses." She set the book aside with reverent care. "Yet your boldness interests me, as does this narrative magic." Her primary limbs gestured to a crystal formation nearby which reshaped itself into a seat sized for a human. "An invitation. You will explain more of these human stories to me," she declared. It wasn't a request. "Beginning with why your heroes always possess fatal weaknesses." What followed was the strangest literature seminar in history. Calivet found himself discussing Achilles' heel, Samson's hair, and Superman's kryptonite with an alien queen whose species had mastered faster than light travel before humans had invented the wheel. Hours passed. Palace attendants came and went, clearly disturbed by their empress's continued interest in the human but unwilling to question her decisions. "Fascinating," Nirizal said finally. "Your species celebrates flaws, we eliminate them. Perhaps that's why we create art, and you create perfection," Calivet replied. Her compound eyes studied him with new intensity. "A provocative theory. Tomorrow, you will bring more of these books. I don't have any more with me, your luminescence." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "Unacceptable. But," Calivet added quickly, "I could tell you stories directly. Humans preserved tales orally for thousands of years before writing them down." Another long, evaluating silence. Then, "Proceed." And so Calivet Raish found himself storytelling for his life, weaving tales of humanity's myths and legends for the most powerful being in the quadrant. When exhaustion finally made his voice falter, the Empress made a sharp gesture. "You require biological maintenance. You will be provided suitable accommodations." Her tone softened almost imperceptibly. "Return when your capacity for narration is restored." As guards led him to surprisingly comfortable quarters, Calivet realized the Terran Alliance wouldn't be hearing from him anytime soon. The Empress had no intention of letting her new storyteller go. Calivet's days fell into an unexpected rhythm. Mornings spent studying in the vast Vashirian archives, access granted by imperial decree. Afternoons recounting human literature to the increasingly fascinated Empress. Evenings alone in his quarters, frantically attempting to recall every story he'd ever read. A month into this strange arrangement, Calivet noticed the atmosphere in the palace changing. Where once he had been ignored as an irrelevant curiosity, now he drew hostile attention. Vashirian courtiers would fall silent when he passed. Military officials openly displayed threat postures in his presence. "The Empress speaks of nothing but human narratives," hissed Drethmavic, the imperial combat strategist cornering Calivet in a seldom-used corridor. "Her advisors are granted mere minutes while you occupy hours of her time with primitive fantasies." Towering over Calivet, the strategist's exoskeleton bristled with specialized defense plates that seemed to vibrate with aggression. "Whatever manipulation you attempt will fail. The Vashirian Empire isn't ruled by emotional impulses like your chaotic species. Calivet kept his posture carefully non-threatening. I'm simply sharing my culture as requested. Your culture is a biological accident barely 10,000 years old, Trethmavik retorted. We had mastered stellar engineering while your ancestors were discovering fire. Remember that before you imagine yourself important. The confrontation left Calivet shaken, but it was only the beginning. The next day, his food contained subtle yet each day the Empress demanded more stories. Her questions grew increasingly specific, probing the nature of human choices, ethics, and emotional attachments. She seemed particularly fixated on tales of transformation and redemption. These characters change their essential nature, she observed after Calivet had related the story of Beauty and the Beast. This contradicts biological reality. Perhaps for Vashirians, Calivet replied carefully. Humans believe in the possibility of profound change. Even for your villains, those who cause deliberate harm, especially for them, we call it redemption. The Empress's compound eyes seemed to darken. Your species extends mercy to those who least deserve it. Sometimes. Calivet hesitated, then added, we believe choices matter more than origins or past mistakes. For several long moments she remained perfectly still, a posture he had come to recognize as deep consideration. Bring me a story tomorrow about your greatest villain who found this redemption. That night, returning to his quarters, Calivet found himself surrounded by 6 royal guards. Their leader stepped forward. The Grand Council requests your presence. This wasn't a request. Calivet found himself escorted to a chamber deep beneath the palace, a perfect dodecahedron carved from what appeared to be a single massive crystal. Within, 12 of the highest-ranking Vashirians stood in formation around a central platform. The human seeks to corrupt the Empress with dangerous ideologies, announced the First Minister, his voice echoing in the crystalline space. He speaks of chaos, emotion, and individualism as virtues rather than evolutionary flaws. I simply answer her questions about human stories, Calivet protested. Stories engineered to influence her decisions regarding the upcoming military campaign against the Terran colonies in the Epsilon sector, countered the Minister of Expansion. Calivet felt cold dread settle in his stomach. He had no knowledge of any planned Vashirian aggression, but if true, it explained why the Empress's growing interest in humanity made the court so nervous. The solution is simple, declared Trethmavik. Execute the human, eliminate the influence. A voice from the chamber entrance cut through the tension like a plasma blade. You would execute my property without imperial consent? The Empress herself stood in the doorway, her carapace darkened to nearly black, a sign of extreme displeasure. The council members immediately dropped into submissive postures. Your luminescence, stammered the First Minister. We sought only to protect you from manipulation. By destroying a valuable resource? Her secondary limbs twitched with controlled fury. The human returns to my custody. Immediately, as the guards hastily escorted him from the chamber, Calivet caught the Empress's words to her council. I have ruled this empire for 7 centuries. Do not presume I can be influenced by primitive narratives. The human remains because I will. It's so. It was meant to reassure her counselors. But Calivet recognized something the Vashirians couldn't, the defensive tone in her voice. The stories were affecting her after all. The assassination attempt came during the 3rd month of Calivet's strange captivity. A ceremonial blade that should have been decorative proved very functional when thrust toward his throat during a formal court gathering. Only the Empress's lightning-fast reflexes, one elongated limb snapping out to deflect the weapon, saved his life. The would-be assassin, a minor noble from the military caste, was immediately executed. But the message was clear. Many Vashirians considered Calivet's influence dangerous enough to risk imperial punishment. That evening, summoned to the Empress's private chambers, Calivet found Nirizal in an unprecedented state of agitation. Her normally fluid movements were jerky, her compound eyes shifting through color spectrums visible even to human perception. Your presence creates instability in my court, she stated, pacing the perimeter of the chamber. The logical solution is to return you to your kind. Calivet felt an unexpected pang at the thought of leaving. If that is your wish, your luminescence. It is not my wish, she responded sharply, stopping directly in front of him. It is the rational course of action. Those aren't always the same thing. For Vashirians they are. Her voice took on a strange, almost vulnerable quality. Or they were until you brought your chaos into my ordered existence. Without warning, she activated a holographic display that filled the chamber with tactical projections, star systems, fleet positions, attack vectors. Calivet recognized the Epsilon sector, where several human colony worlds existed on the edges of Vashirian space. 3 of your colony worlds sit atop crystalline deposits critical for our hyperspace technology, the Empress explained. Before your arrival, the solution was obvious. Systematic conquest, minimal human casualties, but complete resource acquisition. She waved a limb, and the display changed to show detailed planetary surfaces. Now I find myself questioning the necessity of this action, considering alternatives that would have seemed inefficient before. Calivet struggled to keep his expression neutral despite his horror at how casually she discussed the potential conquest of human worlds. Your stories speak of coexistence, of mutual benefit despite differences. She sounded almost accusatory. You have infected my decision matrix with alternatives. Is that why your court wants me dead? Because they fear you might choose peace? They fear change. The Empress moved closer, towering over him. I have ruled by perfect rationality. For centuries. Now I question whether rationality alone leads to the best outcomes. The implications stunned Calivet. The Vashirian Empire, known throughout the galaxy for its cold efficiency and unstoppable expansion, was reconsidering its approach because its Empress had developed an appreciation for human literature. Tell me, she demanded suddenly, in your human stories, when a ruler changes the fundamental principles of governance, what typically occurs? Calivet swallowed hard. Often, revolution. Her head tilted acknowledgement. Precisely the calculation my ministers have made. They believe I am compromised by human sentimentality. They prepare countermeasures even now. The room's crystal wall suddenly darkened, becoming opaque. I have 17 hours before the Royal Guard implements the succession protocol, she stated with eerie calm. A safeguard designed to remove monarchs deemed unfit to rule. Calivet felt cold dread wash over him. They're planning to overthrow you? To preserve Vashirian tradition and purity of purpose. Her multifaceted eyes studied him intently, unless I demonstrate that my exposure to human concepts has enhanced rather than diminished my effectiveness as ruler. How would you prove that? By implementing a solution to the Epsilon resource conflict that serves Vashirian interests while incorporating human ethical considerations. Her secondary limbs produced a small device that projected the image of a book, the original gift Calivet had brought. I require one final story, human. One that will help me forge a path no Vashirian monarch has walked before. As the palace around them secretly prepared for coup and counter-coup, Calivet Reish found himself with the impossible task of finding a story that might save not only his life and the Empress's rule, but potentially prevent interspecies war. Fate of worlds now hung on the power of narrative. Calivet paced his quarters, mind racing through literary history for a story powerful enough to guide an alien queen through political revolution. Nothing seemed adequate for the task. A soft chime announced a visitor, surprisingly the Empress herself without her usual guard detail. In the privacy of his chambers she seemed different, her regal bearing tempered with something almost like uncertainty. Time grows short, she said without preamble. The council convenes in 6 hours. I must present my solution then. I'm still searching for the right story, Calivet admitted. Perhaps, Nirizal suggested, her voice taking on an unfamiliar, hesitant quality. You could create a new one. The request stunned him. You want me to make up a story? Your species excels at creating rather than merely recounting. Her compound eyes shifted through spectra of blue, a sign of intellectual curiosity, he'd learned. I require a narrative specific to this situation, not one repurposed from your past. Calivet took a deep breath. Then I need to understand exactly what you're facing. Not just the political challenge, but you, the person beneath the Empress. For a moment, he thought he'd overstepped catastrophically. Nirizal went utterly still, a predatory stillness that reminded him forcefully of her species' evolutionary history as apex hunters. Then, incredibly, she settled onto the floor, folding, her limbs to bring herself closer to his eye level, an unprecedented gesture of equality from a Vashirian royal. For 7 centuries I have ruled according to pure logic and the principle of Vashirian supremacy, she began. Each decision calculated for maximum benefit to our species. Each conquest justified by our superior claim to resources and territory. Her secondary limbs moved in a complex pattern that expressed concepts Calivet couldn't fully interpret. I believed this was wisdom. Now I recognize it as merely habit. Her voice softened. You're I want to test their validity, she corrected. If cooperation truly offers superior outcomes to conquest, the empirical Vashirian mind should accept this. But my council sees only risk and heresy in changing methodologies that have succeeded for millennia. Calivet felt a strange weight settle on his shoulders. The Empress wasn't just asking for a story. She was asking for a roadmap to fundamentally transform an interstellar empire. Tell me about the crystalline deposits, he said suddenly. The ones on human colony worlds that your empire needs. Quantum, resonance crystals, essential components in our hyperspace navigation systems. Currently we mine them on 17 worlds, but our expansion requires new sources. And humans use them for... They don't, she replied. Your species lacks the technology to utilize their properties. You build settlements atop invaluable resources without recognizing their significance. A thought began forming in Calivet's mind. What if that's not the whole story? What if humans have found different uses for these crystals? Uses your scientists haven't discovered? The Empress's head tilted sharply. Interest, surprise. Elaborate. I'm not suggesting it's true, Calivet clarified. But what if, as a thought, experiment, each species holds part of a greater understanding? What if Vashirian technology combined with human innovation could create something neither could achieve alone? Her compound eyes seemed to brighten. A cooperative paradigm with demonstrable technological advantages over conquest. Exactly, Calivet nodded eagerly. Instead of taking our colonies, what if you proposed a joint research initiative, Vashirian, scientists working alongside human researchers, sharing knowledge rather than replacing one with the other? The Empress rose in a fluid motion, her posture radiating new energy. Not merely a moral argument for cooperation, but a practical demonstration of its superior efficiency. A story where both sides win. Calivet confirmed. This is not a story, she corrected him. This is diplomacy. They're not so different, Calivet smiled. Both require imagination, empathy, and the courage to create something new. For the first time in their strange relationship, the Empress placed a gentle limb on his shoulder. A gesture of physical connection almost unheard of between Vashirians and other species. Then help me write this new story for our people, she said, not as my captive storyteller but as a representative of humanity. As they worked through the night, crafting proposals and countering potential objections, Calivet realized the true power of the book he had brought. It hadn't just entertained an alien queen. It had opened her mind to possibilities beyond the limited narrative her species had always followed. And perhaps, just perhaps, it would save millions of lives in the process. The Grand Council chamber vibrated with tension. 53 of the highest-ranking Bashirians stood in ceremonial formation, their exoskeletons polished to blinding brilliance, their postures radiating barely contained hostility. At the center of this intimidating gathering stood Calivet, the first human ever permitted to witness a full Imperial Council. "The presence of this alien contaminates these proceedings," announced Supreme Admiral Vextoth, his war-modified limbs clicking against the crystalline floor. "Empress, we request his removal before sensitive matters are discussed." Nirizal, resplendent in formal regalia that made her already imposing figure seem almost mythic, regarded the admiral with frigid composure. "The human stays," she declared. "As architect of the proposal I am about to present, his input may be required." A shocked murmur passed through the assembly. Calivet forced himself to stand straight, though his heart hammered painfully against his ribs. "Counselors," the Empress began, activating a holographic display that filled the chamber with stellar cartography. "For 3 millennia, the Bashirian Empire has expanded through systematic conquest and colonization. This approach has served our immediate needs but created increasing resistance from other spacefaring species." The display shifted to show conflict zones across multiple sectors. "We currently commit 37% of our resources to maintaining control of disputed territories. Another 12% addresses diplomatic conflicts arising from our expansion methodology." Drethmavic stepped forward. "The cost of greatness, your luminescence. Lesser species naturally resist the superior order we bring." "Or," countered the Empress, "a sign of systemic inefficiency in our approach." She gestured, and the display focused on the human colonies in the Epsilon sector. "Consider our current objective: acquisition of quantum resonance crystals from these 3 human-occupied worlds. Traditional protocol dictates conquest, minimal population displacement, and resource extraction." Admiral Vextoth nodded approvingly. "The operation plans are finalized. We await only your command to proceed." "I am canceling the military operation," the Empress announced. The chamber erupted in protests. Counselors began displaying threat postures, their limbs extending in gestures of challenge and disbelief. Nirizal raised a single primary limb, and silence fell instantly. "Instead," she continued, "I have authorized a joint research initiative with the Terran Alliance. Their scientists working alongside ours will explore new applications for quantum resonance technology." "Collaboration with primitives?" Drethmavic's voice dripped with disdain. "What could they possibly contribute that our scientists haven't already discovered?" Calivet stepped forward, heart in his throat. "Different perspectives. Humans approach problems differently than Bashirians. Where you see linear solutions, we often find unexpected connections. Preliminary simulations," the Empress added, displaying complex mathematical models, "suggest a 73% probability of technological breakthrough within 5 years through collaborative research, compared to a mere 28% through traditional Bashirian methodologies alone." The numbers gave even the most hostile counselors pause. Bashirians, for all their prejudices, respected empirical evidence. "Furthermore," she continued, "this approach requires only 6% of the resources a military campaign would consume, with 0 casualties and no diplomatic repercussions." A younger counselor, the Minister of Scientific Development, moved closer to examine the projections. "These simulations assume human cognitive processes complement our own in specific research contexts. Is there evidence supporting this assumption?" "Indeed." The Empress gestured to Calivet. "For 3 months, I have conducted a controlled experiment, exposing myself to human narrative structures and problem-solving methodologies. The results have been illuminating." She displayed her own neural activity charts, showing new connections and patterns that hadn't existed before Calivet's arrival. "I have become more effective, not less," she stated simply. The introduction of human perspectives has enhanced my decision-making capabilities while maintaining Vashirian logical rigor. For hours the debate raged. Traditionalists argued for the safety of established protocols, while younger counselors cautiously expressed interest in the potential efficiencies of the collaborative approach. Throughout, Calivet stood beside. This council has no authority to overrule the Empress on matters of strategic direction, he reminded the assembly. The succession protocol applies only in cases of demonstrated deficiency. The empirical evidence presented today shows enhanced, rather than diminished function. His pronouncement effectively ended the coup attempt. One by one, even the most resistant counselors acknowledged the Empress with gestures of submission. As the council dispersed, Admiral Vexus Toth approached Calivet, towering over him menacingly. "This experiment will be closely monitored, human," he warned. "At the first sign of disadvantage to our empire, your influence will be permanently eliminated." "Fair enough," Calivet replied with more confidence than he felt. "But I suspect you'll be disappointed." Later, alone with the Empress in her private observatory, Calivet watched the stars through a crystal dome that somehow made the distant suns seem close enough to touch. "You've changed the course of an empire," he said quietly, "with a decision that started because of a book. Not merely the book," Nirizal corrected him, "but the mind that recognized its value, that understood stories could contain wisdom even for species evolutionarily predisposed to dismiss them." She gestured toward the stars. "Tomorrow you will return to your people as our first official human cultural ambassador. You will help implement the joint research initiative and establish cultural exchange protocols." Calivet felt an unexpected twinge of regret. "You're letting me go?" "I am expanding your role," she replied. "Freedom serves our purpose better than captivity, another lesson from your human stories." Her compound eyes studied him with an intensity that made him wonder how much of her decision was truly based on imperial efficiency. "But you will return regularly to continue my education in human narrative traditions," she added. "I find I have developed a preference for your particular method of presentation." In the subtle harmonics of her voice, Calivet heard something no human had ever heard from a Vashirian ruler: affection. "I would be honored, your luminescence." "When we are alone," she said, her voice softening to a register he'd never heard before, "you may call me Neri, against all diplomatic protocol, against the biological improbability of cross-species connection, against the cold calculations of empire." Something new had blossomed in the space between their worlds. It had begun with a human who gave an alien queen a book. It would continue with two species writing a new story together, one that neither could have imagined alone. And across the vast interstellar distances, as word spread of the unprecedented alliance forming between humans and the formerly hostile Vashirian Empire, other species watched with growing interest. Perhaps they whispered among themselves, there was more to these humans than their primitive